Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Gregory, and I'm the Public Affairs Director of the Australian Jewish Association. We're doing this interview today to expose ugly anti-Israel events being held in Sydney and Melbourne this week and last. The AJA email inbox has been flooded with members of the community raising concerns after the Australian Jewish News, believe it or not, ran a puff piece prominently promoting the visit of a radical leftist to campaign against Israel on behalf of the New Israel Fund, the NIF. NIF is notorious for claiming that Israeli democracy is at risk. They've been doing this for at least the past decade. People connected to groups' NIF funds have been involved in terrorism, and the list of allegations goes on and on. So my guest today is Olga Deutsch, Vice President of NGO Monitor, which is a policy analysis think tank focusing on non-governmental organizations and has been involved in exposing some of the anti-Israel lies and deceptions. Thank you for joining me today, Olga.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for raising this important issue with the Australian audience.
Of course. Now, what is your assessment of NIF, and can you describe some of the problematic New Israel Fund activities in Israel that you've encountered?
Well, NIF has been around for a while, and much more than a decade. They were created in the early 90s, and allegedly as the direct result of the failed Oslo Accords. And their proclaimed agenda, their mission is to build and support a thriving civil society in Israel, and an open one that promotes rights of minorities and all ethnic and different groups. And a lot of the work that they do actually does exactly that. They have huge funds that they have put at disposal of a variety of NGOs, non-governmental organizations. According to their 2021 annual report, their budget was $31.8 million US dollars, and 17.3 million went directly to grants to NGOs. So that already says a lot, meaning part of what they do is direct grants to NGOs that they support. And the other part, which is half, if not more, goes to political advocacy. So they're not just a grant providing organization, they're a huge political platform that pushes for a very specific agenda in Israel. And the projects that they support in the field of welfare and reconciliation or women's shelters and so on is more than welcome and is amazing. However, there is a line of so-called human rights, non-governmental organizations that they support that are highly problematic, and they proactively work, let's just call it by its name, they proactively work to undermine Israel's right to exist as a Jewish democracy. They promote lawfare against Israel, which is a very, it's another word for advocating for Israeli officials to be prosecuted in the Hague and the International Criminal Court. They advocated for the creation of the United Nations Commission of Inquiry, and now they make submissions to it and testimonies to investigate Israeli human rights and other crimes as a legal precedent, as a step towards criminalizing Israel in The Hague. Some of these groups openly promote and support BDS. Some have partnered with terror-affiliated individuals or NGOs on the Palestinian end, and which begs the question: what is the actual agenda? Now, on NIF's website, you will find, because these questions are often asked, right, to NIF officials and leadership, and on their website, they will say that NIF does not support BDS proactively and would not fund BDS itself. But in the same breath, they will tell you that they support the freedom of speech and free debate and open civil society, which, is another way of saying we will not fund BDS, but we will not fund NGOs that support BDS. And the same goes on lawfare against Israel. For a while, their website actually said that they oppose lawfare and prosecuting Israeli officials in international courts. But recently they have changed that on their website, and now they put up a completely vague, actually, statement that says in very complicated language that they do believe that Israel has sufficient checks and balances and judicial system and committees in place that should be able to investigate Israeli officials when they break the law, right? So they do not support extraditing Israeli officials, but they don't say it as such, and they no longer say that they oppose lawfare, which is just a nice way of sort of saying we will not support it. But again, just like in the case of BDS, we have absolutely no issues supporting NGOs that do. And a lot of the NGOs, a lot of the groups that they support proactively advocate against Israel around the world.
So I think that actually my next question was going to be, does the NIF directly or indirectly support or fund BDS, which is, those who don't know, it's boycott, divestment, sanctions, boycotting Israel. And I think you've sort of answered that at least indirectly they do support this.
Well, yes, absolutely. But it's also a question of how one defines BDS today, because you could ask that question in a very technical way and ask for a yes or no answer, right? Do you support the BDS movement? Now, first of all, there is no such thing as a BDS movement that could be financially supported, because there's no bank account of the global BDS organization. BDS movement is a grassroots or a movement, global one, part from the PA and its leadership, but it has so many different faces around the world now, and some of its manifestations are one-man shows, grassroots activists around the world, and some are very skilled political advocates and lobbyists who go around the world and promote lawfare against Israel. One also needs to ask the question, is supporting BDS, does it mean supporting boycotting products that were produced in what they will call occupied territories or Judea and Samaria, right? Or does it mean boycotting Israel as such? Because all these things are at hand. Now, I will give you an example. When NIF, if we know that NIF has provided almost $3 million to an Israeli organization breaking the silence in the last 5 years, and breaking the silence promotes, calls for extradition and prosecuting Israeli officers and soldiers outside of Israel, then and this is one of their main programs, that it is a very problematic statement for NIF to say that they do not promote lawfare against Israel. Or when you know that in the last 5 years they have provided $1.4 million to B'Tselem, and B'Tselem was actually another Israeli so-called human rights organization who also on paper promotes human rights, rights of Palestinians, fights occupation, but most of its activities in the last couple of years have been calling Israel apartheid and lobbying that Israel is apartheid around the world. Let me remind you that B'Tselem was the first organization before Human Rights Watch and before Amnesty International to issue a lengthy report calling Israel apartheid. They are the only organization, and so far the first and so far the only, that use the term Jewish supremacy, which is unheard of in non-Jewish circles to use that term, and they freely used it in their report from a few years ago calling Israel apartheid. So they might not fund BDS itself, but they definitely fund organizations who proactively seek to not only seek, they fight against Israel as a Jewish democracy. They call it open society and a democratic society, but when we say one state solution or one country for all, then we all know that what everyone means is the end of Jewish democracy.
Well, I think it's pretty clear. I'd like to think that every Australian Jew would be very uncomfortable with their money ending up in all those sort of causes, whether it's directly or indirectly. So yeah, on the giving them the benefit of the doubt and hoping they just don't know. But which takes me to my next question. Is it a fair description to say the New Israel Fund engages in the demonization of Israel? Is that a fair statement?
Well, I think it's I shy away from black and white statements. I do believe that most of their leadership genuinely believes that they're promoting a vivid and thriving civil society in Israel. But it is important to distinguish between a thriving civil discourse inside of Israel and one that is being deliberately exported outside of the borders of Israel and outside of the Israeli society, because most of the Israelis don't busy themselves with these issues. Most of the Israelis, to them, let's bring the IHRA working definition into the equation, which is a very topical discussion in Australia, right? Given that Australian government parliament tried to support it and implement it, but then there was an opposition spearheaded by J Street and NIF and an organization supported by them, saying that the IRA working definition is not the relevant definition of anti-Semitism today. And what is special about the IRA working definition is that it tries to bring together the old-fashioned neo-Nazi, white supremacy, fascist expressions of anti-Semitism that we all know how to identify and we all condemn, and the new forms of anti-Semitism, which have to do with Israel and Zionism, and it gives 11 examples. Amongst those, you have examples such as denying Israel's right to exist as a Jewish homeland and Jewish democracy is to be seen anti-Semitic. Targeting Australian Jews and attacking them because of the policies of the state of Israel is to be anti-Semitic, because an Australian Jew is not a citizen of Israel. He or she is a citizen of Australia. Collectively holding Jews accountable for Israeli policies is to be seen as anti-Semitic. Calling Israel a Nazi endeavor is to be anti-Semitic. Now, to most Israelis, this is a no-brainer, whether they vote left or right wing. But most of the Israelis also don't suffer from anti-Semitism, right? We live in Israel. These issues are, however, extremely important for Jews around the world. And they do dictate also how an Australian government will deal with these issues and how a campus in Australia is supposed to rule in a case of violence against Jews on campus, that whether it is verbal or physical. And when NIF and the groups that they support comes and proactively lobbies against the IRA working definition, I believe that they're actually working proactively against the Jewish community in Australia. They might call it supporting a thriving Israeli civil society, but that is the last thing that lobbying against IRA actually does. It also doesn't help the Palestinian cause. If we say that that's what their agenda is, it doesn't really help them. It only perpetuates the conflict because it legitimizes Nakba as a ethos, and as something that should be commemorated. And what Nakba is an Arabic word for catastrophe, and this is how the Palestinians call the Independence Day, where the state of Israel was created. Now, if we perpetuate with millions of dollars Nakba as a legitimate part of the Palestinian ethos, then what we are really teaching Palestinians is that they should not be talking to Israelis at all, right? Because if we are an illegitimate entity here, and it was just a catastrophe against Palestinian people, then what kind of an equal and vibrant civil society are we hoping for? So it's a long answer to your question, but I actually think that they are doing a disservice to the Jewish community in Australia or wherever they take their agenda. I think that they are diluting a very important conversation about how to combat anti-Semitism today that is on the rise around the world. And at the end of the day, a Jewish student on a campus in Melbourne, when attacked, he or she doesn't care, what's the fine tuning. At the end of the day, it's an Australian Jew who was attacked, and the campus needs to have tools to know when it's an anti-Semitic, a hate crime, and that it should be sanctioned as such, and when not. And in that sense, they're really, really only diluting the discussion and undermining the Jewish community in Australia.
100%. And AJA, we've been involved in the IRA definition for a few years, particularly in universities and particularly in the state of South Australia. And we have come across these Jewish people, Jewish individuals and groups that are working against it. And it's always very embarrassing to be able to explain, why they do what they do. And, it might be a bit not politically correct, but, my personal observation is that some of these individuals are, they may have some psychological issues, self-hating issues of their own, which comes out in their activism, but it's hard to explain. My next question, though, is some of the Jewish communal leaders have publicly stated, and they believe the community must be a broad church or broad synagogue in this case, and it should include all types of groups, including groups like NIF, who are on the extreme fringes. So should Australian Jewish organizations and roof bodies be speaking out about NIF infiltration to the community? Is it appropriate for example, the Australian Jewish News, the largest Jewish newspaper in Australia, to be promoting anti-Israel events as legitimate? What are your thoughts on the place of NIF in the community?
Well, look, you can't sanction anyone from expressing their opinion. The question is whether we should give them a platform and how broad of a platform we should give them and what kind of a platform. I do think that certain things should be, that there should be a red line on certain things. I think denying Israel's right to exist as a Jewish democracy and a homeland of Jewish people is a red line that should not be crossed. And the Australian Jewish community is known for being one of the greatest supporters of State of Israel and for one of the most Zionist communities around the world today. But even if some would say, it is a legitimate thing and we wanna give them a platform to debate, it should be a debate where their opinions are at least challenged and it is brought in a debate and in a dialogue with someone else, and not presented in a vacuum. And number two, I do think that there's a difference between allowing for such a debate inside of the Jewish community and giving a platform and access to Australian elected officials and parliamentarians and legislators, because I do believe that there is a great importance in Jewish organized communal life, and one that is elected, right, that represents the Jewish community, and only those should be allowed to speak on behalf of the Jewish community and what the Australian Jewish community sees relevant vis-a-vis their elected officials. So it's a political thing, but again, it's interesting to say that when NIF leaders come to Australia, they seldom speak about the other projects that they support in Israel, the welfare and the women and, the shelters and so on. They choose to mainly address issues of very partisan topics that at the end of the day are a matter of Israeli voters, and resolving this during elections and inside of Israel. And they usually only bring to you only the messages of these few fringe NGOs that they support, who, by the way, do most of their activities outside of Israel. So again, NIF claims to be supporting a vibrant, open civil society inside of Israel, but everyone from Combatants from Peace, Breaking the Silence, B'Tselem, Molad, Moked, all these NGOs, their activities are mainly outside of Israel, lobbying governments around the world, the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, And that hardly contributes to any type of discourse or dialogue inside of the Israeli society.
100%. I mean, I've never seen anything from the New Israel Fund. I've never seen anything positive. All I've seen is complaining about different things in Israel. So it's, yeah, that's what we see here. My last,
and, it's a tough thing to, trying to make a case that everything is bad in Israel while everyone else in the world is celebrating Israel as the high-tech power. And again, there is nothing wrong about expressing one's criticism over Israeli policies, just like you would do in the case of any other country, and discussing it as realpolitik. But to single out Israel and present it as the gravest human rights violator around the world, and to call for Israeli officials, if you think about it, to be the only country from the Western, democratic world whose officials you say should be prosecuted in the International Criminal Court in The Hague, that is an extremely grave statement.
it is. It really is. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, some of the people involved in the New Israel Fund and with similar Australian groups, they're well-known anti-Israel extremists. They've been around for decades. Others, they're youngsters who naively, but genuinely believe they're supporting Israel through constantly attacking and protesting against it. What advice would you give to young Jews who think that they're actually supporting Israel when they support these extremist activist groups like NIF or BDS?
Well, I think it's a broader question of, the progressive discourse today, the global one. It is not reserved only for the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or the Middle East. But it is also one that has to do with the way that news are brought to us today, the pace at which we are fed the news in sound bites and much quicker than 10 years or 20 years ago, and our capacity to process that amount of news. My advice would actually be to be critical and to ask a simple question. I'm not going to tell anyone what to think and what to support. I think it is a legitimate dream for young people or older people to want Israel to be as good as it can be, as perfect as it can be of a democracy, while it preserves its Jewish character. But I would advise anyone to ask themselves, is this truly contributing to that? Or is it just broadening and deepening the rift and the divide and the hate? It is only polarizing, between the two groups even further. And it is doing the opposite of allowing or catering for any type of dialogue or bringing the two people together, or even the different camps inside of Israel closer together. When you want to reconcile between the two sides, you don't bring the worst about the two sides to the table. You actually do the opposite, right? You say, let's think about what unites us. Let's think about our common shared challenges and how we can join forces to overcome them together, right? And there are many challenges in Israel. Israel is far away from a perfect society, just like any other country around the world. So we need to ask ourselves, are we doing this to feel better about ourselves because we use the words human rights in the same sentence as talking about Israel, or are we really contributing to that conversation? And if we are honest about that, coupled with being a little bit more critical about the materials that are being served to us, double check the sources, check where the information came from, because a lot of the news today are being pushed by organizations who have political agendas. And again, I am in favor of a critical discussion of Israel. We do it all day long, every day in Israel. If there is one thing that is a commonality amongst all Israelis, it is that we debate and we fight amongst each other and we don't agree. But we need to never forget that 75 years ago, we did not have a homeland, and now we do. And it is a very difficult discussion how to continue developing Israel as a thriving democracy while maintaining its Jewish character. And I don't think anyone has a simple, or one-line answer to that. But as long as we all keep that on our mind, that is the challenge on hand, then I think people will at least think a little bit more critically.
I really hope so. Thank you so much for joining me today, Olga. You've exposed the New Israel Fund for what they are. I think after this interview, no Australian Jew who supports Israel can claim ignorance about what they're involved in. So, we've got quite a big reach. So hopefully this reaches all the people that it needs to. And yeah, I just want to really thank you for giving your time. It's really important to expose this what's going on.
Well, thank you for having me, and keep up the good work. It is very important to have voices like this. And the one thing that we can do is when there are visits like this and they try to lobby, we need to expose them, at least provide the alternative view to what is behind a lot of the things that they will say and share.
Thank you. And yeah, everyone should follow NGO Monitor, keep up with the important work they do. And thank you again, Olga. Thank you for your time.